What if I told you this was never about borders? It was about who's been quietly paying the bill the whole time. Now, this week, Donald J. Trump, acting through the United States Department of State, ordered a freeze on immigrant visa processing tied to 75 countries. And immediately, the media screamed one word: cruel. But that reaction skipped the part that actually matters. This move traces back to oversight hearings inside U.S. Congress, where welfare data coming out of Minnesota forced a question nobody wanted to answer. What happens when immigration policy and public benefits collide at scale during an affordability crisis? Well, while you're paying higher rent, while you're paying higher groceries, while you're paying higher interest, while legal residents are stretched thin in places like New York City and across California, even places like Florida, the system kept operating on an assumption: someone else would absorb the cost. Well, President Trump didn't create a new law. President Trump enforced an old one: public charge rule. And the moment that lever was pulled, the immigration system didn't protest. It panicked immediately. Applications froze. Timelines collapsed. Attorneys sounded alarms. So tonight, we're going to break down why 75 countries were cut off, what the welfare numbers actually showed, and why this wasn't a slogan move. It was actually a financial choke point. Stick with me, guys, because this changes the entire debate. So everybody stared at the border cameras. But that's not where this happened. This move came out of the paperwork layer, the part of the system that most people never see. When Donald J. Trump, through the United States Department of State, froze visa processing, it didn't look dramatic. No fences, no guardrails, no raids, just files that stopped moving. And that's why this hit harder. A processing freeze doesn't just delay entry. It suspends approvals, renewals, sponsorships, timelines, entire financial assumptions built into the immigration system. Families waiting, employers budgeting, states planning, all of that got paused.
Pausing processing for these 75 countries, which include Russia, Egypt, Colombia, is meant to stop what they say is abuse of the system and prioritize people who they say are self-sufficient. Critics are pointing out that this isn't fixing the lock, it's narrowing the doorway, especially for poorer countries, for elderly applicants, people with health conditions, and it runs the risk of making the U.S. so unattractive a destination that it's going to disincentivize the people we do want to come here, youth and talent who would contribute productively to the U.S. economy.
Border enforcement reacts after someone arrives, but processing freezes decide who never gets approved at all. And that's the difference. This wasn't about stopping people at the door. It was about stopping the downstream costs before they ever hit the ledger: healthcare, housing, benefits, subsidies. And the moment that these files stopped moving, the system realized that this wasn't symbolic. This was surgical. Be sure to drop a like for the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, folks, the panic here didn't come from activists. It actually came from attorneys, because the rule that President Trump enforced was not new. It was old. It was quite dusty, in fact. Quiet, ignored. The public charge standard, buried in immigration law for decades, already allowed the government to deny permanent residency to applicants likely to rely on public benefits. Everyone assumed it would stay dormant. Why? Because enforcing it means making decisions, hard ones, financial ones. It means saying no before the costs hit taxpayers. Is anyone happy to hear this? Is anyone in the comments saying thank you, Trump?
Chair recognizes Mr. Gill from Texas for the first question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing so expeditiously. We all know this is an important issue, not just in terms of welfare fraud, but also immigration more broadly. So we appreciate it. And thank you for the witnesses for taking the time to come here. I want to start with you, Mr. Balu. Again, thank you for being here. Do you know what percentage of Somali-headed households in Minnesota are on food stamps?
No.
54%. Do you know what that number is for native Minnesota-headed households?
Well, to be clear, a majority of the...
It's 7%. There's a big difference between 54% and 7%, is there not?
Excuse me, sir, could I answer the question?
Let me.
Well, once Trump signaled that this rule was alive again, phones lit up. Immigration lawyers knew exactly what it meant. Cases that would have sailed through before, suddenly questionable. Sponsorships that depended on benefit usage, now exposed. This wasn't a new law. This was an old lever finally pulled. And when that happened, the immigration system didn't argue policy. It scrambled for cover. Now, this dynamic isn't limited to immigration. Let's be real, guys. Insurance companies, they don't make money by helping people save money. They make money by hoping you don't ask questions. That's the business model. They bury rules, they keep things quiet, they assume that most people won't challenge it, just like they assume that no one would ever enforce the public charge rule, but we just talked about it. And this is why I partner with Chapter. Chapter understands how these systems work and, more importantly, how to flip them back in your favor. They review Medicare plans the way enforcement should work, line by line, no assumptions, no shortcuts. Now, one of our viewers, Leslie Taylor, found $1,000 in savings after Chapter reviewed her plan. Another, Sharon, she got her coverage restored after being dropped, simply because someone finally asked the right questions. So here's a real question for you. Who keeps winning? You or the system? Most people already choose themselves. This is why they're dialing the phone number at the bottom of your screen right now, or they're visiting askchapter.org/Ron right now. There's a link in the description down below. That phone number again is 909-563-8279. All right, let's get back to it, guys. Here's the part most immigration debates dodge. What happens after the approvals? Anybody ever ask that? Well, the system didn't just move people, it moved obligations, healthcare, housing assistance, food programs, education support, all downstream costs that don't show up in the visa application, but absolutely show up later.
Pause on visas that kicks in on the 21st is explained as a way to save money and end any draw on American public resources, including medical treatments. There will be 75 countries affected. So far, the list includes Somalia, Russia, Afghanistan, Brazil, Iran, Iraq, Egypt, Nigeria, Thailand.
That is the welfare pipeline. And for years, nobody modeled it honestly. I mean, not at scale, not over time. The assumption was simple. Approve first, figure it out later. If costs ballooned, the federal government absorbed it. If states struggled, they adjusted their budgets. If cities cracked, they asked for more money from the government. But once Donald J. Trump reacted to this public charge standard, the pipeline was suddenly visible. Approval wasn't just about eligibility anymore, it was about sustainability. And this wasn't a moral judgment on immigrants, it was a systems check. And systems don't respond to narratives, they respond to numbers. This is when the conversation changed, quietly, but permanently. Every system has a breaking point. Minnesota exposed theirs. During oversight hearings in U.S. Congress, welfare usage data tied to immigration sponsorship didn't just raise eyebrows. It forced recalculation, not rhetoric, math, arithmetic.
You know what percentage of Somali-headed households in Minnesota are on food stamps?
No.
54%. Do you know what that number is for native Minnesota-headed households?
Well, to be...
It's 7%. There's a big difference between 54% and 7%, is there not?
Excuse me, sir, could I...
So what made Minnesota different wasn't ideology, it was documentation, audits, testimony, paper trails connecting immigration pathways to long-term benefit reliance. Once that data entered the record, federal agencies couldn't unsee it, and they couldn't pretend it was isolated either. If it was happening there, it was happening elsewhere. It's just less transparently. Now, Minnesota didn't cause this policy shift, but it sure did trigger it, because once Congress sees a pattern, enforcement follows. Slowly, reluctantly, then all at once. And this is how national freezes start. Now, this list here completely shocked people for the wrong reason. Almost everyone asked which countries were on it. Almost no one asked why some were not on the list. Now, this wasn't some blanket ban. It was very selective, risk-based, built around patterns the United States Department of State already tracks: overstay rates, sponsorship reliability, and post-entry dependency indicators. Countries with lower downstream cost exposure didn't make the cut, but others did.
The U.S. is going to be much more selective about who it lets into the country. And the fundamental legal reasoning here is it's already on the books. It's rooted in existing law under federal immigration rules. Visas can already be denied if someone is likely to become what's called a public charge, meaning dependent on government benefits.
It is causing massive panic for family members. This is going to be spouses of U.S. citizens, children.
Americans voted in a landslide to uphold the sovereignty of this country. Americans, by overwhelming majorities, just oppose refugee resettlement in principle. So the public is behind this.
That's the part that critics avoid because it ruins the discrimination narrative. If this were about optics, the list would look different. If it were about ideology, it would be louder. Instead, it was quiet, technical, and targeted at where the welfare pipeline historically spikes. Inclusion and exclusion tell the whole story here. Who's missing from the list matters just as much as who's on the list. This wasn't random. This was triage. This exact pattern shows up in your life in a place you feel every single month. Your mortgage. Most people were told, it's just how it works. 30 years. Don't touch it. Don't think about it. Same story, same assumption, same quiet rule that no one questions. And yet, every month, this payment hits. Not just money, pressure, obligation, a clock ticking in the background of your life. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. Most homeowners don't have a mortgage problem. They have a strategy problem. You were never shown how to attack the balance, how to shorten the timeline, how to turn the system against itself. This is why I built a simple 4-step framework that shows people how to pay off their mortgage in just years instead of decades, without needing to win the lottery, without extreme sacrifice, and without playing games. Now imagine this for a second. No mortgage payment, more monthly cash flow in your pocket, choices again, flexibility again, peace. Now that's not a fantasy. That's math. Once you know where to apply pressure and how to eliminate your mortgage fast. Now, if you want to see how this works, click the link down below to learn about how to pay off your mortgage fast. I left a link for you in the description down below because the fastest way to change your future is to remove the biggest bill sitting in it. Now, the outrage came first. The data came later. Headlines exploded the moment the freeze was announced. Cruel, heartless, un-American, and then almost nothing. Because once the welfare numbers surfaced, the tone changed quietly. No retractions, no follow-ups, just a pivot to emotion. Personal stories, edge cases, anything except the math that triggered the move in the first place. That's how this system works. When the numbers don't cooperate, the narrative shifts. The media doesn't disapprove the data, they sidestepped it. And in doing so, they left viewers with half-baked story, the reaction without the cause. But policymakers don't govern on headlines, they govern on budgets, audits, and capacity. That's why the outrage failed and the policy didn't. So agencies, they don't panic over speeches, they panic over procedures. Now, the moment the United States Department of State stopped moving files, the realization actually set in at that point. This wasn't messaging, it was just purely execution. Case officers didn't advance approvals, attorneys couldn't promise timelines, sponsors couldn't model the outcomes, everything downstream stalled. And this is when the system flinched, because a freeze isn't loud, it's paralyzing. It disrupts renewals, freezes family sponsorships midstream, and it forces compliance reviews that were previously waved through. Even lawful applicants suddenly face questions that they hadn't been asked in years. Symbolic policies generate press. Operational policies generate fear. And once agencies felt that pressure internally, the tone shifted. No more grandstanding, just quiet scrambling to understand what standards are now live again and how many cases wouldn't survive them. That's how you know that this is real. The math breaks before the politics do. You got places like New York City and across California, they felt this immediately. Not because New York City and California felt it due to ideology, but because of exposure, high rent, high benefit usage, thin margins. These cities inside of New York and California, they operate with constant federal backfill. When immigration pathways assume post-entry assistance, costs stack fast. Housing vouchers, healthcare, education support, and when approvals pause, those assumptions collapse. Sanctuary policies didn't fail loudly, they fail financially. This is why the pressure showed up first in budgets, not protests. Cities already strained by affordability crises could not absorb more uncertainty. The freeze didn't create the problem, it revealed it. So when capacity is gone, enforcement stops being theoretical, it becomes necessary. Now, this is not ideology, it's capacity. When rent eats half a paycheck, when groceries jump again, when healthcare premiums don't stop climbing, the question isn't who's welcome, it's who can the system still support? Immigration enforcement collided with affordability because they share the same pressure points. Housing supply, emergency rooms, classrooms, and budgets that just don't stretch anymore. A visa approval doesn't just add a person, it adds demand. Demand for apartments, demand for services, demand for assistance when wages don't keep up. This is why this shift landed now, not during a boom, during a squeeze. Policymakers didn't wake up mean, they woke up boxed in. And when capacity runs out, choices get harder. The visa pause wasn't about closing doors, it was about slowing the cost down before they tipped systems that were already at the edge. And so this is the part nobody wants to say out loud. Family-based sponsorship multiplies risk. Not because families are bad, but because dependency compounds. One approval becomes two approvals. Two becomes children. Healthcare, schooling, housing, all connected. Now, for years, the system assumed sponsors could absorb that load, or that the state would, or that the federal government would somehow figure it out later and bail them out. Later finally arrived. And so once the public charge standards snapped back into focus, family cases became unavoidable pressure points. Not singled out, exposed. This is why this feels personal, because it is. is. But look, inevitability doesn't care about intent. When benefits are part of survival, sponsorship becomes a financial question, not just a legal one. And when budgets are tight, enforcement stops pretending otherwise. Now, other countries never even pretended otherwise. If you want to immigrate to Japan or Germany or Australia, you don't start by asking what benefits you qualify for. You prove you could stand on your own 2 feet. That's the filter, always has been. So what Donald J. Trump did was stop treating America like the exception. Through the United States Department of State, the message became simple. Entry is not a guarantee, and permanence isn't charity. Self-sufficiency isn't punishment, it's the baseline. This is why this wasn't loud. No new slogans, no mass rallies, just enforcement. Quiet, technical, effective. And when critics called it cruel, they skipped the global context. America didn't invent the standard, it finally rejoined it. Filters don't shout. They select. And once the filter turned back on, the system adjusted because it had to. Systems remember enforcement. Once rules are actually applied, behavior changes. Applicants rethink strategies. Sponsors reassess commitments. Attorneys stop promising easy paths. Benefit usage gets recalculated. This is the part nobody talks about. Even if future administrations soften language or tweak the thresholds, the precedent is still set. Files can freeze. Approvals can stop, old rules can wake up. And everybody knows it. That knowledge doesn't disappear. This wasn't some one-off, it was a recalibration, a reminder that immigration policy isn't just values, it's math, capacity, and sustainability. And when those collide, the system chooses survival. This is why this moment matters, not because of the headlines, but because of what changed underneath them. And once you see that, the debate doesn't look the same anymore. Be sure to drop a like for the video and subscribe. We'll see you next time.